Good afternoon, everybody. Call the meeting to order. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting of the Audit Finance Committee to order. The roll call. Do I just do that myself? Or do you do that?
I'll be happy to.
Please, yeah.
Chair Segura,
Here.
Trustee Emerald,
Here.
Community Member Schmidt, Community Member Gutowski,
Present.
Dr. Jenny Salkeld, Jenny Carbuche, Daphne Enriquez, Ana Maria Alvarez, Dr. Alvarez.
Here.
The meeting is called to order.
Thank you. This is the point on agenda where members of the public may address the committee on items before the Audit Finance Committee. Any public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes each.
We do not have any public comment this evening.
Okay, then we can just dive right into the business at hand. C1 is the election of a new committee chair. Oh, fine, yeah. Oh, hey, Dr. Ligeti. So we just need a,
Are we taking nominations?
yes, we'll take a nomination.
I would like to nominate Member Segura as chair.
There's a motion
I'll second.
and a second. All right, let's vote. Trustee Emerald, yes, I'm a yes.
Yes.
Yes, and then yes. Thank you so much. Then we can move right into C2, which is the audits. And it's so good to see everybody here in person. It's been a while. Mr. Smith and Elizabeth Saw, yeah, and Dr. Salkow and all your team and all the Sweetwater staff. So it's good to see everybody. And we'll just go right into C2 and hand it right over to Dr. Salkow.
Thank you, Chair Segura, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce our audit partner with Crow, Kevin Smith, and the senior manager, Elizabeth Stav. They will be presenting our audit engagements for the 22-23 year, which we have included in your packet. This year, they will be assisting with the district-wide financial audit, the Proposition O financial and performance audit, and what's new is also our Measure DD. So we did have an issuance in October, and so they will also be performing a performance and financial audit for that measure as well. So they will be providing an update there, as well as other items that we have with our state school facility report. So I will defer to them to provide the specifics of their plan.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon and welcome.
We put together a client service plan that kind of walks through our process. I feel like it's been a while since we've put something more formal together for you to follow along with, as we normally would just communicate verbally all of the planning. So hopefully you'll find this helpful.
Do you have a hard copy?
I do not.
Perhaps you can provide one after the program so we can go and review it.
Sure. Yep. Okay. All right. So to start off, we just have a general letter to the audit committee just expressing our appreciation and that we love to represent you and work with you. And then on the next page, if we rotate that around, it just lists out thank you. It lists out your team. So your audit partner, Kevin Smith, he's right here. We also have a technical advisory partner. Our firm likes to always have multiple layers of review and support. And so Christine Torres is another public sector partner who has been involved actually in Sweetwater's audit behind the scenes for the last several years. She will continue to support Tony Boris, myself, Charles Ribley, who's not here with us. He's a senior manager. He completely overlooks and oversees the Prop O and Measure DD bonds. I will not be involved with that per request of the committee. So that lists out his roles there, and then Tori Jockle is our senior staff who will continue to work with the day-to-day. Continuing down, sorry about that.
I think one of the important pieces of that engagement team, very consistent, allows us to hit the ground running, focus on an effective and efficient audit. The other thing I would always share is that although we work with management on a daily basis throughout the audit, we work for the audit committee. So if you ever have any questions, concerns, et cetera, please feel free to reach out to myself or anyone else on that list, because we do work for you.
May I just interject? I find this unacceptable. We should have received hard copies of this report before this meeting so that we could have reviewed it and have questions that are of value. So I just wanted to log that. I don't think that this is an appropriate way to present it if you don't give us hard copies in advance for us to study.
Duly noted.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, yeah, maybe just going forward, we'll provide hard copies as necessary for those who need it. And I know it was emailed out, and I reviewed it on Friday, and I received it. I guess you didn't even get it, so I reviewed it over the weekend and today, so we'll have to work on that.
In fact, I believe all members of this board should receive copies, regardless of whether we're serving on a subcommittee or not. This is part of our due diligence, is making sure that we're running this district in a financially responsible way. And it's really difficult to do that if we don't get copies of audits. You know, you can do your public relations report right here tonight, but it's not doing us any good. So I hope that going forward, you'll be sure that we get copies and that we have an opportunity to speak with somebody, to ask questions, and we can do this in an appropriate manner.
Superintendent?
Thank you, President Segura. Definitely, it's noted, and I'll work with staff to make sure that happens, and you receive the hard copies ahead of time. Thank you for that.
I'd also add that this is more than a, I don't know what you called it, public relations. There's detailed information in here, and I know there's letters of engagement and items of that nature in here that I read through, so please continue.
Chairman Segura, I'd just like to add to that. Yes, the purpose of tonight is not to present any audit results. It's to present our audit plan. We will work with management to ensure that you receive everything that you've requested. But again, we're not presenting any results. We're presenting our audit plan.
Regardless, every member of this board should receive,
Trustee
excuse me,
Emerald?
every
Trustee
member
Emerald?
should
Trustee
receive
Emerald.
a copy of any report that
Trustee
you
Emerald, I'm
provide.
sharing this meeting, so you need to please acknowledge that. Do not just jump in and speak directly. I know you're
I hear
upset.
you. I hear
know
you.
you're upset, but we just need to, you know.
It's just starting off all
Cooperate.
wrong tonight with this report.
Okay. Please proceed.
All right, so continuing on, this page just talks about client experience and some information about the firm, thought leadership that we have, testimonials of working with us, which we can gloss over that and get to the meat of the presentation. And then, so here's the plan, the audit plan for the next year, and the deliverables you can expect to receive through the process. So we will be providing an audit of the district's financial statements for the year June 30, 2023. We will perform an audit of the district's compliance with types of compliance requirements described in the State of California 22-23 Audit Guide as issued by the state. We will perform an audit of the district's compliance with types of compliance requirements described in the OMB Compliance Supplement, which is your single audit or federal audit, as prescribed by uniform guidance from the federal government. And as a result of those, we will have a deliverable of the annual audit report, as well as a SAS 114 required communications letter that will provide all of our required communications to the committee and to the board. We will also do an audit of the financial statements for Prop O and Measure DD, as well as the performance audit of the Prop O and Measure DD bond funds, which are two separate reports. Here is our planned timeline. So our first audit planning starts now when we meet with the committee. This is where we start laying out our risk assessment. We invite commentary from the committee to continue on our risk assessment. If you, like Kevin already mentioned, if you have issues or concerns or areas that you want to bring up, After this meeting, you are welcome to channel that to us as we continue on our risk assessment. Risk assessment is extremely vital to the audit process, and it is a continuous process. It is not something that we just do this week. It is something that we continually do throughout the entire process until the audit is issued. First interim field work is where we will do your attendance testing as well as student body internal control understandings. This is the list of schools that have been selected to be audited, and we will be performing that work the week of May 15th. I believe those school sites have already been notified and are preparing for our impending visits. These procedures that we perform during that part of the process is dictated by the state audit guide. We don't come up with those ourselves. That is a compliance portion of the audit. Our second interim field work, where we go over the entity level internal controls. We look at your account specific controls such as cash receipts, disbursements, payroll, bank recs, your IT systems. That all occurs, the plan is the first week of August. We will also complete our state compliance testing as part of that week, and then most of the federal compliance testing as well during that week. There will be follow-up for both of those when we get to the year-end portion. The year-end portion will be during October 2023. We come out and we finish all of the substantive testing, we wrap up compliance, and start preparing that large annual report that you get at the end of the process. And then Prop O and Measure DD will also happen at the same time under Charles Ribley's purview. And then we meet with the Bond Oversight Committee, and we meet with the Audit Committee, and we don't have the specific dates for those yet, but it generally has happened in the November, December timeframe. We find that a timeline like this really helps management and us to ensure that we stay on task and meet the December 15th filing deadline. Just as a reminder, Prop O and Measure DD, the bond audits, those don't actually have a required deadline of 12/15, but we like to have those all done at the same time. All right. Did you want to talk about this part, Kevin?
Sure.
Okay.
And we will, at the conclusion of our engagement, when we come back in December, we'll discuss any changes to our audit plan or approach that may have occurred. That can be due to our risk assessment. That can be due to any other matters that may have come to our attention during the engagement that required modifications. But very quickly, we will be performing our responsibility under two separate standards. First and foremost, those promulgated by the ICPA, or what's considered generally accepted auditing standards. Because you receive federal funds, we will also be performing our audit in accordance with government auditing standards. So those set on top of the generally accepted auditing standards and require certain other aspects of both testing as well as training of our people, etc. First and foremost, our responsibility is to perform our audit in accordance with those two standards and obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Does not alleviate management of their responsibility to prepare those financial statements or their responsibility to establish a framework of internal controls designed to be able to accumulate those financial statements. Nor does it alleviate those charged with responsibility for governance, or what we would deem to be this committee, of their responsibilities to provide oversight to the entire financial reporting process, including the audit. We believe that we know we will plan our audit to comply with those two standards, and at the conclusion we'll have obtained reasonable assurance to support our opinion. Those opinions can be unmodified, which is the highest level of assurance, which is what the district has received in the past. It could be modified due to a departure in GAAP, or it could be an adverse, which means that we just disagree with the financial statements. There's no determination at the time of engagement as to what that opinion will be. It's directly as a result of each individual engagement. As Elizabeth said, we spend a significant amount of time in our planning process. That is both internal amongst the team, as well as discussions with management, as well as those charged with governance to understand any significant changes in the internal control structure, identification of significant or unusual transactions that may have occurred in the given year. We make our assessments, we perform our audit really kind of in two steps. And we do discuss that from a timeline perspective. An internal control, although we don't opine upon the internal control, it's required to understand that internal control and understand the impact that that could have on detecting a material misstatement. From that final risk assessment, including internal control, we determine what substantive procedures are necessary. There's two kind of key concepts, though, that I want to highlight in that. One is the concept of materiality. We do not opine that the financial statements are correct within $1 or within 43 cents, et cetera. We have a concept called materiality, which is both quantitative and qualitative. And it really means that there is not an error embedded within the financial statements that we believe would cause a user of the financial statements to come to a different conclusion, whether it be from an investing standpoint, et cetera. So we're really focused on material items. Now, if you think back to your financial statements, they include multiple columns. So if you're familiar with a commercial entity, they have one column, et cetera. The school district has numerous columns. We assess that materiality and opine at each one of those column levels. So although the government-wide, when we bring on capital assets and debt, et cetera, may be the largest number, we're not performing all of our procedures based upon that materiality. We're really basing it upon the smallest columns that you see within your financial statements. The other thing that I really want to highlight is the concept of sampling. We perform statistical samples on a variety of your routine transactions, whether that be disbursements, payroll, et cetera. We do not look at every transaction, otherwise I'd have the same number of staff as you do and look over their shoulder as they're recording each individual transaction. So that concept of materiality as well as sampling, all embedded within the professional standards, is what allows us to perform those procedures and reach our opinion as to the fair statement of the financial statements. We spend significant amount of time anywhere where we deem there to be significant risk or a significant audit risk. That could be management override of controls, it could be revenue recognition, and a variety of other factors. We look at both manual controls as well as IT controls. However, as you remember from previous conversations with the audit committee, we do not rely on very many IT controls here prior to the implementation of the new system. We test the manual controls that have been put in place around that IT system. We also spend a significant amount of time on estimates, whether that be the pension, the long-term pension liability, depreciable lives of capital assets, et cetera. Anything that doesn't necessarily just tie to cash in or cash out that has a defined number, we spend a significant amount of time understanding management's assumptions and arriving that estimate. We test those assumptions and we ultimately concur as to the reasonableness of the assumptions as well as the calculations. Some of the areas that we spend significant time in addition to those estimates: revenue recognition as well as the management override of controls that I mentioned, long-term debt, both the confirmation of those existing balances, testing any covenants, et cetera. We also spend, as Elizabeth has mentioned, the student body testing as well as the Prop O and the DD measures. We also spend a significant amount of time working with your in-house counsel to understand any significant litigation that could or could not or could potentially need to be accrued within the financial statements and understanding that. The thing that you engage us to do is to perform the audit as an independent auditor. I am also asserting to you today that we are independent of Sweetwater based upon all of the factors within the professional standards that we must adhere to in order to remain independent. One of the things that we will also do with both internally as well as with management and the chair of the audit committee is to have a fraud risk discussion. This is where we provide our overall assessment of the risk of fraud, because we are responsible for not the identification of fraud, but the identification of any material misstatement, whether it be caused by error or fraud. So in order to do that, we have to understand the susceptibility of material fraud within the district. We'll discuss that with Chairman Segura. We'll also discuss any awareness that he may have as to the awareness of any fraud or suspected fraud within the engagement. And then from that perspective, I always try to remind people, although I don't anticipate finding fraud, if I do, we would follow kind of an ordinary chain of command. If it happened at the school district level, I would be meeting with the superintendent and with Dr. Sockeld and understanding and explaining what we have found and asking for their input, investigation, etc. I would also report that to the chairman of the audit committee. However, if that fraud were to involve the superintendent or the chief financial officer, I wouldn't discuss that with them. I would be bringing that directly to you, Mr. Chairman, to understand your perceptions as well as to discuss the next steps that need to occur in order for us to complete the financial statement audit. Finally, we've included Exhibit B for accounting developments. Thankfully, this year is relatively consistent with previous years. Last year, management did a tremendous job in implementing GASB 87, which was the leasing standard. This is very similar in nature to that. However, it deals with only those applications or long-term agreements that are associated with information technology. And we have been in touch with management, understanding exactly where they're at in that process and developing our audit plan to address that implementation of the new standard. That's the most significant of anything that GASB has issued, nor are there any significant changes within the AICPA or the Yellow Book requirements from an auditing standards. However, there have been two items that the State Compliance Audit Guide has updated for this fiscal year: the home to school transportation reimbursement, as well as the independent study certification for ADA loss mitigation, will be focal areas within the current year audit. The third one, the expanded learning opportunities, or the ELOP, has been pushed back 1 year, so that will be a focal point in the 2024 audit. That is our audit plan. Again, when we come back at final, any changes to that approach or scoping of the engagement would be discussed with the audit committee at that time, and if significant, would have been brought to the chairman's attention prior to that meeting. Any questions as it relates to our audit approach?
Right here.
Trustee
Thank
Amro?
you. Thank you very much. First of all, any communications with the committee, I expect to get copies as well. I'm a voting trustee as well. So whatever materials you provide the chair, I would expect you to provide me too. All right?
If he will direct.
I have
if he-
fiduciary duty with regard to these issues. And for 8 years, I worked with the San Diego City Council to correct auditing problems there as well. So I've got experience here, and I don't want to be left out of these communications, which are so important to the decision-making of this panel. Understood? And Mr. Chair, do you agree that I should also be included in any communications with regard to this issue or any other that comes before this committee?
So I'm not an expert on all that is required, but I will defer to Superintendent for his.
Sure, thank you, President Segura. So generally speaking, if there's issues that are raised along the lines of those would come to the reporting line, but if there are definitely issues that have to do with CFO or myself, I think that was a pretty unique circumstance that was being explained, but definitely we can share all the documents with the entire committee.
Well, you see the problem I have from jump here tonight. Mr. Segura said he received this report before he read it. I was never provided a copy, and I'm a member of this committee.
Ma'am, I-
So I need assurances that I'm not going to be left in the dark again. Understood?
Ma'am, I apologize. We will work with management to endeavor to ensure that that does not occur. I did not send this packet to Chairman Segura. The district did.
Okay, well,
We
whoever's
provided-
making those decisions, I need to be in the loop here. If I'm going to be on this committee, if I'm going to be on this board of trustees, I need to have every piece of information that's provided to a chair of a committee, all right?
And to that extent, it was my understanding it was sent, perhaps it was only electronically. I will direct staff to send a hard copy moving forward to those who desire it. So if some want it electronically, we can continue to do that. If you want a hard copy, of course we could send.
Either way, if one member of this board is receiving documents that has to do with the business of this committee, as a member of the committee, I should also receive, whether it's electronic or physical,
Yeah, I
right?
see. So it's my understanding it was sent. If it didn't go through, then there might be some other issues, but I can circle back with our board office, which I believe did send it electronically. It may not have
The
made
board
it.
office did send it electronically. If it got stuck or was too big or something like that, we can check, but every member
Well,
of the committee was sent this document.
I've been through all of, since my computer we've
Yeah.
got the new passwords and all. I've checked through everything and it did not come.
I-
So I just want to make sure nothing like this happens again, because for me, it's a red flag.
Agreed.
Okay?
Agreed. We're
It's a red
definitely,
flag.
and it was our understanding it had been sent, so
It
it might
was.
have been caught in the. in
And
the
we've had
system.
members in the past that have stated that they prefer to have things in paper, and then Ms. Vicedo drives it over to them. So if that's your preference, we can also make sure that that's done.
Just want to make sure I'm in the loop if I'm going to be up here making decisions, important financial decisions on behalf of this district. Thank you.
Definitely.
Was there any other, any questions on the actual items?
I like to stay green, and so, yeah, just electronics fine.
Yeah, same here. Okay, we can move on then. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Committee matter?
Sorry, it's not necessarily on the plan, just kind of what was mentioned in the plan. I don't know if this is the time to ask that question. Just in terms of the schools that were identified, how were those schools chosen? And if this is not the time to ask, I can ask.
That's a perfectly valid question. We are required to look at 20% of your school sites on a rotating basis, so annually. So this is just a rotation schedule that we have put together since the start of our relationship with Sweetwater, rotating out to high schools and to middle schools. So by the end of a 5-year process, we should have touched all of them. So it's just part of the rotation schedule.
Is it possible to see what schools have already?
Sure, yeah.
been- Okay.
Absolutely. I
That'd be
can
great.
have that sent over.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, please proceed. Dr. Selkow.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda that the Crow team will provide an update on is the school facility program audits. There were quite a few that were reviewed based on projects and grant funds that were received. I'll have
Yes.
Elizabeth Sav provide an
Yeah,
update.
I can talk about that. So the state facility program bond funds is completely separate from your financial audit and district audit, and it's completely outside of like the December 15th deadline. This is a program where schools throughout the state could apply for grant funds for certain construction projects at different school sites, depending on the nature of the project, et cetera. And so the OPSC, or the Office of Public School Construction, a number of years ago outsourced the auditing of these grant funds and programs out to external auditors. They used to do these audits themselves, and I think they found quite a backlog that they were encountering. And so there is a whole audit guide, Appendix B, it's about 90 pages, related to state facility program bond funds and how to perform those audits. And so Sweetwater submitted their, they call it a DLOP, but it's an expenditure detail for 7 different projects as to the OPSC. As soon as that DLOP is provided to OPSC, you are given a 1-year clock to have those audits performed and completed. So 6 of those 7 projects have now been, those audits have been completed and submitted. As a result of those audits, there were no findings in relation to any of the expenditures that we tested. We didn't have any issues noted, and so those reports are now sitting with the OPSC and the State Controller's Office for review. From our experience so far, since this program has been rolled out a number of years ago, waiting on the approval of those reports could take some time. We are just now getting approvals for audits that were done 2 years ago. So it could just be kind of a slow process that has nothing to do with Sweetwater, has nothing to do with issues with your projects. It's just simply the backlog that's happening at the state. There is one project, one of the 7, that should be completed and filed by the end of this next week as it's going through our final levels of review. But it's technically not due until July, but we're ahead of schedule and we'll have it done and filed and you'll be done with that. So, any questions on those? I didn't think you wanted to walk through each one, but you can review through them. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us about those.
So.
Go ahead,
is
Mr.
that-
Gutowski.
Thank you. Is that covered under the district audit for the general fund, or?
No.
Your payment for those?
No, it's a completely separate contract because of the nature of the projects, yeah.
Okay, and thank you for that. Can we turn to one of the sheets? I have Chula Vista High application. I'm on the PDF page 97, or it would be Chula Vista page 10. Just I want to make sure I understand everything correctly and just have some questions.
No problem. They are unique
Yes.
projects.
And, as we are flipping through, one that perhaps Dr. Stockheld can do. So it's part grant and part district contributions. My question to the district then, for the district contributions, where did the funds come from? Is it general fund, Mello-Roos, or bond?
I'll tag team here with Ms. Quirk. Most of it is from either bond fund. Some of them might be CFDs, but most of them are bond funds, correct?
Good evening, thank you for the question. So these are funds that we pursued as reimbursement to the district-wide HVAC project that we did back after 2016. Collectively, it was for $17.5 million. There's an analysis that's done for each one of our campuses that's managed by our consultant, and what they're tracking all the time for us is our enrollments, the age of our campuses, and where we're eligible for modernization and or new construction dollars. So we paid for everything up front. Their calculations were done for each one of these projects, and that's what you see, the reimbursement value that we received on behalf of each of those campuses.
So it's bond funds?
Yes.
Okay. It got me mixed up with district contribution.
We pay for it up front with the bonds, and then we go for the state match after the fact. So we spend first and then pursue the reimbursements.
Okay, and then any savings then are credited then back to either?
Yes.
To Propo in this case?
Correct.
Okay.
Superintendent?
Thank you, President Segura. I just did want to add, in this instance, it was out of bond, but in the future for other projects, it could also be out of our CFDs, our Community Facilities District. So it could also be that. Again, the state generally has a kind of a sliding scale, if you will, in terms of the age of the facility. But in this particular instance, it was out of the bond program.
Correct. And just as an example, we are submitting for East Lake right now for modernization work that they're completing on projects that are recent. So you'll see those in the way future.
Thank you. That answers my questions on the grants.
Any other questions on this? I did notice that they were, like you said, they're from 2000. Most of them were completed in 2017. So I imagine most of them were AC work that we were doing at that time, the millions and millions of dollars on the AC units at those sites. But I was also very happy to find that there was no findings listed. That was the key to it all. Okay, do we have any other questions on this? If not, we can move on. Dr. Salko.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next item we have on the agenda are the ongoing audits or new audits that are non-associated with our CROW team. And I think if Carolina pulls that up, then when she has that up, our first item is regarding our federal program monitoring review. That was an extensive process at the tail end of last year. It's about a 2-year cycle that we go through that process with the CDE. They look at various departments throughout the district, various programs, it's not just fiscal in nature, it's also programmatic. And we have Dr. Alvarez here and Ms. Delgado who helped lead that effort. And so I will have them provide an update on the outcomes of the report that was issued on December 19th.
Good afternoon, Mr. Segura, board member, and the Audit Finance Subcommittee. Thank you for being here. So the federal program monitoring really, as Dr. Salkeld referred to, really looks at programmatic statutory requirements as well as fiscal requirements for all of our categorical funding. And so we, as a district, go through this process every 2 years. We are selected based on size, scope of our programs, both at school sites and at district level. That federal program monitoring occurs. This year we had quite a comprehensive program. And if you've noticed, we were measured in various areas. One of them had to do with the adjusted cohort graduation rates, which really looks at how we are monitoring our student graduation over a 4-year period. We also looked at the federal stimulus monitoring, which included all of our one-time federal and state monitoring monies that were provided to the district. Compensatory ed was monitored, as well as career technical education, educational equity, our English learner programs, our supporting effective student instruction, and school support and improvements. Throughout these, we, as I mentioned, it was not only a district level monitoring, but we had school sites. And in your documents, you'll notice we had several school sites that were included, as well as some school sites were monitored for specific programs. So our high schools, of course, would be those that would be related to the adjusted cohort graduation rates and our CTE programs. And then across the board, we looked at other items. With this, it's a very comprehensive tool. When I think of the totality of the district and the number of personnel that were involved in this uploading of information, we had thousands of documents that were uploaded. Our state and federal program department led that work in terms of coordinating, but we had legal services, we had educational equity, we had compliance, our CTE, our student services were involved, as well as teaching and learning with our curriculum instruction, and then research and evaluation. So across the district, we worked on this collectively. This occurred in a timeline where we upload information through November of 2020, and then they came and did an on-site visit with us for 5 days actually it was the last week of December for our schools. Students were doing finals, but they came and conducted their on-site visit. So very comprehensive. They interviewed our staff members. So if anybody was budgeted or paid out of federal funds, they did interviews to make sure that we were really meeting the tenor of the law of what those requirements were and what those job duty and functions were occurring in terms of supporting our students. So that happened across the board. Griselda, do you want to talk a little bit about the instruments and what those were?
There we go. I think you did a great job, Dr. Alvarez, in describing all the instruments and everything that was reviewed. One of the most important pieces that you mentioned was the collaboration between so many different departments. And the purpose of the review, notice how this is not called an audit, it's a review. And the reason they come every 2 years and do this is so we can tweak and refine our processes and procedures to ensure that all restricted budgets are used appropriately. So whether it's a staffing, you're using the funding to pay people, or you're using the funds to buy things. So that's why it was a tiresome but a collaborative experience that after the process was over, we had items that we gave homework to ourselves of how we're going to refine our systems. And that's the whole point of the review. So every 2 years, you get to tweak and tighten what you do well already. Well, how can we make it better? So we were very happy with the results of the review. And like Dr. Alvarez said, it was very comprehensive, and we can't wait for the next 2 years because every 2 years they come. And this one was my second one, was my first in person, and I think everyone thought that it was one of the most strenuous ones. So I'm glad that we all went through it and we came out with flying colors. But thank you for your support.
And then if I just may add, the sites that were reviewed this year were Castle Park Senior High School, East Lake High School, Montgomery Middle, Montgomery Senior High, Olympian High, Otay Ranch, San Ysidro High School, and then Sweetwater High School. So quite a good sampling of our schools were reviewed. When we looked at the items, they're out of the totality of all the elements, and when I say thousands of documents, the monitoring tool is very comprehensive, and so each of those monitoring areas had at least 50 to 60 elements. We had 8 findings, and those findings were very minimal. They were findings in terms of minute language that needed to be included in what's called an administrative regulation. Normally, those administrative regulations are adopted through our cabinet process. What the federal program monitoring team wanted us to do was to go outside of that scope and take it to the board. And we did that. We just did it a couple of days after they had left. And so all of our findings have been cleared. So when we go on to the monitoring tool, it appears that we have met all the requirements of the federal program monitoring. So we were very happy with that.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments on that work? I do remember that going down, and it was an all hands on deck, because talking to the superintendent for a lot of the staff, and I could still see it in the staff's face. Good thing you had a little vacation after that. But yeah, that's quite a lot of in-depth reviewing they do, I guess, so congratulations on doing all that work and tweaking that and making it better. If there's no questions on that, we can move on.
Okay, thank you. The next item is regarding our CalPERS pay schedules and pay rates. This item is noted as pending, although all the action items have already been addressed, either brought forward to the board, or there's some items between payroll and HR that have been addressed to remedy. Some longevity pay as an example. So we've been working with the state auditor. The letter to conclude this particular review is with the Office of Audit Services at the state. And so once we have that letter, we'll bring it forward for the committee for your reference, and we will conclude this particular review. The next item we have, this is an open and ongoing, it's our AB 139 extraordinary audit. This is specific to our work with the Infor computer implementation. That was one of our corrective action items, so we anticipate having that completed in July, starting the new fiscal year, so that will address this particular open item. The next item we have that's ongoing at this point is the County of San Diego Human Services Agency. From time to time, they will request a review of the invoices of what's been remitted for reimbursement. So that you can see here that they're looking at the fiscal year 21-22. So staff and the program are working together to provide the necessary information at this time. And once it's concluded, we'll also bring that forward, what the outcomes are. And then the next items we just note as a reference what the CROW team recently shared regarding their audit. So we have this listed on this schedule as well. And that's what we have under the open and ongoing audits under fiscal services.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think it's the next item on the agenda.
Okay, so the next item we're at.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here in person.
Thank you. Brown Act.
Thank you. So now we're on C3, the Brown Act. I think that'd be handled by our general counsel.
Yeah, I can, yes.
I know all of you well enough to know that this will not be your first Brown Act training. Many of you live the Brown Act on a daily basis in one of your public agencies, or I've personally given you this training at least a couple of times. But we do try to make sure that each time we start a new term, we talk a little bit about the Brown Act and what our expectations and obligations are. Very commonly, our board may decide to go above and beyond the Brown Act, but we're talking about what the Brown Act itself requires. So as we go to the next slide, you'll see that we're going to talk about a quick summary of the Brown Act. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the agenda requires, i.e. what are we required to post, what are we required to explain, what are we required to attach, what actually is a meeting, what are prohibited communications between you as a subcommittee member, a subcommittee of members? What does public participation look like? What are violations of the Brown Act? And kind of some best practices. So we have had open meeting laws in California since the early 60s, or when we really started to codify a lot of new information. And again, in 2004, voters actually amended the California Constitution to mandate Brown Act and the California Public Records Act to be broadly construed with the intent of ensuring that the public's right to access information was available concerning the people's visit, and so people's business. And so I think that really is the purpose of the Brown Act, is to ensure that just about every one of our decision-making processes of legislative bodies, of local agencies, are conducted in public and are conducted in a way that the public has the ability to scrutinize it. So what does the Brown Act require? It really requires and creates a procedural framework for public agencies to meet, to deliberate, to act, to debate, to listen, and to do that collectively. Some people like to think, well, we're just talking about it or thinking about it, that doesn't count. Well, actually, that is part of the deliberative process, and it includes staff and constituents in that. And so it really is a way that the public has the right to rightfully observe and comment on how elected officials manage public affairs and spend our public money. And it's designed to promote openness and fairness. And as of the 2004, some would say sooner than that, but as of 2004, it was made very clear in the California Constitution that this is meant to be broadly interpreted. And in close cases, transparency or putting that information out wins unless there is an exception. So, what is a meeting? A meeting is any congregation of a majority of members, and this is the actual definition, of a legislative body at the same time or place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon an item that's within their scope. And their subject matter jurisdiction. And so it isn't about necessarily exactly that it was placed in these words, but it really is the collective acquisition and exchange of information prior to a body making a decision. So study, fact-finding, pre-meeting, all of those when they are within your jurisdiction. It includes current members, it includes newly appointed members coming together, it includes direct communications, it includes intermediaries, it includes devices, formal or informal. And the meeting itself does not need to be a publicly called meeting, and I think a lot of times what we're getting at is these side meetings that are intended to not occur. So, more specifically, this includes Brown Act-worthy subcommittees. You happen to be a Brown Act-worthy subcommittee. What that means, our Board of Trustees made a determination that this was an ongoing public standing committee, and it also, because it deals with finances specifically and audits, would have been Brown Acted, even though it doesn't have a majority of committee members. And so I think that is a really, really key point. That's why we're here. You're like, why are you telling me this, right? So what meetings don't include? They don't include individual contacts. They don't include public conferences. They don't include community meetings or other local government agencies, social gatherings, birthday parties, standing committees, in the sense of, or confirming the availability. So when Deanna's calling to see, or Carolina's calling to see if you can make a meeting. So long as those meetings, individual meetings, are not happening in a serial format. And by this, we mean we absolutely, individually, you have a right to speak with Dr. Sockeld or to speak with Dr. Aguirre about a topic that's on the agenda. We absolutely have the right to do that. That is not considered a meeting. But if Dr. Sockeld, which she'd never do, would say to you, well, oh, Miss Emerald, Mr. Segura told me X, Y, and Z, right? That's 2. The second we get to, depending on who we're counting, you guys are 4, so to me 2 is still an issue. There's probably someone missing, right, Jen? Because there's normally 5, right? There's 4. And so for us, like that becomes the conversation, right? So we're trying to make sure that those communications are not serial in nature. So we have the right for staff to meet with folks, but staff cannot tell you what another committee member has said. And like, oh, well, you know what? Mr. Segura had this really great question. He asked blah, blah, blah. Okay, right there, we wouldn't do that. We might well say, one of the things we want to make sure we address is X, Y, and Z. So we might address that question, but we would not, we try not to serial on those communications. So what about properly noticed? What about locations? What about logistics? So all of your meetings must be open and public. In this case, you're not a committee that has closed session meetings, so there are exceptions that are within the Brown Act for when we can have a closed session meeting. Generally, those meetings need to be within public boundaries. Again, for the most part, subcommittees are not falling, we're outside of emergency standards, so we're not really trying to be holding remote meetings. There are remote rules under the Brown Act that are pretty complex as to when and where and how and what you calculate. There are some new laws related specifically to holding remote meetings that are still questionable about whether they apply to subcommittees, because it takes a look at your general and your normal meetings, so your regularly scheduled meetings. And so for us, we obviously are doing our best to make sure we're having those public meetings. And if we end up having to cross the bridge of when we can hold a remote meeting again, we will provide a little bit more guidance. So the meeting places must be accessible to the public. They must be non-discriminatory. They must not require payment, must not require purchase. The Brown Act doesn't require you for subcommittee meetings to record or broadcast your meetings. We try to make sure that at minimum we post items. That is a thing if an item is handed out at a public meeting, not necessarily in advance. Obviously, we post items on our agendas. Those are available to the public. If we hand out a meeting here, it now would be scanned in and part of the record, so therefore it is a public record from there. And for subcommittees in particular, minutes are only required. So we do not require especially for subcommittees, but any of our meetings, that we actually take a verbatim transcript. What it is you take minutes of the required action. And then similarly, there are some new laws this year about disruptive conduct. Should we have a subcommittee meeting that's disruptive? Dawn's not super disruptive, so we're probably not going to have that out here. But there are some new rules around what the chair of the meeting would need to do to stop that meeting and have it proceed going forward. So let's go to the next one. Properly noticed. So what are our agenda requirements? So for a regular meeting, you set your schedule, obviously. Those agendas must be posted 72 hours in advance. Subcommittees as well could have a special meeting. Those are called on a 24-hour notice. Agendas must be posted on 24-hour notice. And when it's a special, it must be on a specific topic and it's restricted to that. So even the public comment is restricted to that specific topic. There are emergency meetings that are permissible, not very likely that that's going to be something that falls within the subcommittee meeting. A special meeting can be called by the presiding officer or majority by delivering written notice. And we then, to the members, and then also from a local paper, to our local paper of general circulation. We also post things on our websites. For our knowledge, just on what are those agenda requirements, it needs to be posted in a location that's accessible. We post on our district websites, has a list of documents or a list of offices where document distribution can be made. You list of how to gain accommodations. There is a new law this year specifically around accommodations as they relate to these meetings. The agenda should always include a location, a start time, and it may include time certains and or end times of your meetings or of certain items. If for some reason you got to that item before the time certain, you can't start, which is why we normally do one time set. They have opening and roll call. There's public comment always. And then there's a list of the business that's going to be conducted. So generally speaking, and again, subcommittees are a little bit different, but generally speaking, a board item should consist of up to 20 words to describe a board item. You're not required to post the documents you'll be looking at, the contract if it's a contract, any of those things. Best practice, we always try to do that and have them. But generally speaking, the rule of thumb is the public needs to be able to understand what the action is. So if we said Brown Act, we're going to talk about the Brown Act. Obviously, we don't get to change the Brown Act or anything. It's not like if we were voting on something, modifying a provision of the Brown Act, for example, we would want to say what we're doing. But generally speaking, we have a statement that someone would know, oh, I want to be there to discuss this. And so it can be a general statement. And under the law, safe harbor is normally less than a 20-word description that lets someone know an item that may pique their interest is going to be there. And then let's go to the next one. Allowable things that can come up when you're not on an agenda that you've listed. Folks can ask for clarification. So we can make requests for clarification. A brief announcement can be made, a brief report of an activity. Sometimes in our larger board meetings, a board member will give an update. Hey, I went to this event, this event, this event. You can have requests that staff report back for future items. But you can't take action on anything that wasn't properly listed there. And then you can briefly respond to statements or questions posed. So let's say Don had a burning question about an item, and he raised it. It would be appropriate for the chair to say, we are going to refer that to Superintendent Aguirre or to Dr. Sockel to respond next time. Or if it really was a very brief answer, that you could go to agenda item 7B from the last meeting and that document is there, Don. Like you'd have that ability, but it has to be very brief and it can't be a new item. So what are prohibited communications? Prohibited communications are when a majority of you come together or either individually coming together or through an intermediary have serial communications about anything that's within the scope of your business here. And so that could be in person, on the telephone, electronically. Oh my goodness, on social media, it even makes it worse now. It only takes 2 of you ever, even if there's a 5-member board, to count potentially as a Brown Act violation. Or as I said, through an intermediary. As we said, it is allowable for the staff member for a committee to meet individually, share content that would have been within your scope, get your feedback individually, so long as they don't go and share what you said with another board member. However, they absolutely can take the collective of what has been said and use that as moving staff direction forward. That is allowable, especially given the delegation of authority that our Board of Trustees as Hardy provided to Dr. Aguirre and to Dr. Salkeld. The key here really is when we send out communications, when, for example, Carolina sends out the agenda, we want to make sure you don't hit reply all. You don't say, hey, tell me a little bit more about item C3, or hey, I want to have a C4 with everybody on it. Those we really, really try to make sure don't happen because they potentially butt up against the possibility of a Brown Act violation. And then the goal is to avoid substantive discussions as a whole. We've seen in other committees, not this one, but in other committees where there's 10 members or 11 members, and they'll start answering each other. You've lived that experience, and you've called it to my attention, like, hey, what do we do to make these folks stop, right? And they will literally start. So what we do is we make sure when we send communications to you, we blind CC everybody else. So you may see one member, maybe Chair Segura would be listed in the two, and maybe Dr. Sockhild, and everyone else would be CC'd, so that even if you hit reply all, everybody won't see it. And you won't inadvertently cause a Brown Act violation. So sometimes you will see that as well. Good, when in doubt, don't email. See, I said that. Good job. And then again, the best mechanism for us really is to communicate directly. If a member of the public, for example, Don, wants to send an email to all of you, he has every right to do that. He can send an email to all of you, and that is not a Brown Act violation. So long as none of you reply to it or start emailing amongst yourself to talk about it, or, other than saying, I am asking Dr. Aguirre to look into this issue. That's an absolutely appropriate response, but it isn't one that you would want to reply or respond. And especially, you have every right as a committee member to reply directly. You're the only person in the audience, Dawn. Sorry. You have every right to reply to Dawn, but when you potentially do that, and you've got your other co-committee members on that, you're setting us up for a bad place. So if you want to reply directly to Dawn, please do that. You can, obviously include Dr. Aguirre or Dr. Sockhild, but you want to make sure not to include other members just because a member of the public chose to include everyone. Our goal is to ensure folks have the right for public participation. And while you sometimes have informality in these kind of committees, we still list public participation. We see if there are people that want to speak, if there's members of the public that wish to speak. But what we have seen in other committees that we've served on is that will digress into just a conversation between you as committee members and members of the public. And that really isn't the intent. The intent is that you are a legislative body. Members of the public have the opportunity to ask questions or to bring up issues, but we don't sit and just, other than me right now, just talk to Dawn back and forth. Like, that is not something we've seen happen a lot of times in committees that we've served on together, but that is something that is not where was not the intent of public participation in the Brown Act. I think that's probably the biggest thing. We have scenarios, we have best practices, we have all of those things. Violations of the Brown Act are criminal liability, there's civil liability, their payment of attorney's fees. There's all sorts of bad things that happen to us. Again, I'm going to go to my best practices. Please, please, please don't send emails to all of you as a committee. Please don't talk about work you do on this committee on social media, please. If you'd like to get off social media as a whole for life, we probably would be not against that either. But just remember, every communication you have on your cell phone, on your personal email address, it's the reason we set up email addresses for you that are Sweetwater-based emails, or we can if we didn't for this committee, but are really intended that if you're having communications about this committee's business, they are subject to release. We do get PRAs commonly on those communications, and we do have to respond. And so the more you are formal in your responses and where you make that, the less difficult it becomes to complete that. So I'm going to leave it at that because I know you guys have already have a long agenda. Are there any questions anyone has about the Brown Act as it relates to this subcommittee? No. It was as much fun as the first time I put you through it, right? if you do have questions, there are, like I said, there are a couple of new laws this year specifically relating to remote work, related to when we post board items and when we post communications and when they're sent out and all of those kind of things. So if you end up having questions or just want to geek out with me on it, you're welcome to give me a holler. Okay?
Thank you, General Counsel.
Thanks.
If there are no questions, we could go on to C4, first interim, under financial reports. Dr. Salko.
Thank you, Chair Segura. So we are presenting as an update, because we had shared this with our board back in December. So Trustee Segura and Trustee Emerald have seen this. This is just an update. We're in the works right now of preparing the second interim. It's going to be going to the board next week. And so the first interim looks at our financial activity through, and if you could go to slide 3, I think we'll start there. It looks at activity through October 31st, so it's our first update of the budget, of kind of looking at what we're projecting June to look like. And it's also the first time where the board takes action on the projected financial condition for a 3-year window. So we were, at the time, we indicated positive, so that has been reviewed by the county. So we will continue with that. So that is what is done at first interim and at second interim. And then if we can go to the next one. And as you've heard me say, it's always based on a point in time, based on the information we have available. So at that point, it was right before the governor released the budget. So that's what we'll actually incorporate in the work ahead for the second interim. The updates that we received in January. So it's at different stages, new information that we have, we incorporate. We also have new information at this point based on enrollment, some of our projections. So we'll update that as well. So I think if we go to the next slide or the one after that has enrollment, this one. So you can see this is where we were at first interim, where we're projecting to see where the current year is, and then our out years. And we've been highlighting this over the course of the last few years. You can see that over this time span, our enrollment has significantly decreased. So certainly it plays a key component into our overall revenues and what we project in the current year and out years. So it's a key consideration. So just wanted to highlight that. And so with all of that information, we bring it forward to here we start to do side-by-side comparisons of the different reporting items that we bring forward to the board. So at that point in December, we were looking with all the puts and takes with our revenues and our expenditures that we knew at that time, still with an ending fund balance of $98 million, which is far different than where we were a couple years ago. So definitely much improved financial position. And then with that information, we then incorporate that into the next slide, which is our multi-year projection. And as you can see here, again, it's favorable over the course of the next few years with our required set-asides of 2%, the economic uncertainties. We also have the board direction there of the 3% contingency, and then the balance is committed to declining enrollment. So again, at this point, based on the variables and the factors we knew at that time, it's a positive outcome. We'll continue with that work over the remainder of the year. And as we also start to build, the staff now is working on the 23-24 budget. I think that's all. That was the financial update.
Do we have any questions, comments around that? Trustee Emerald?
Thank you very much. So far, it's looking positive, but are there some factors we need to be looking at going forward that could impact the bottom line here?
I think as we're working on the second interim and as we continue the work from now until June, particularly building the 23-24 budget, is what the governor has proposed in terms of some revenue considerations. There's one grant as an example, the arts, music, and discretionary grant. There was a significant reduction, which will be incorporated into our second interim. The district was awarded $21 million. But with this cut that was in the governor's proposal in January, it's now $13 million. So again, those are the work, the advocacy that can be done from now until June to see if that amount can be restored. But we just need to continue to monitor enrollment and average daily attendance in the current year. Our cutoff, which is known as P2, is March 17th. And so that's coming up. So we've been reaching out to our schools to ensure that they incorporate and add all of their attendance information so that we can keep that percentage as high as possible. It has decreased over the years. The district has historically been around 94%. This past year was around 91, 92%. So that's a significant amount of revenue loss with that decline. So we just need to continue to improve on that.
And are there any particular causes for for that drop in attendance?
A lot of it's attributed to the COVID and some of the,
Still, the
mhm.
COVID.
We're still seeing some results or outcomes related to that.
So are they still going down, or are they starting to level off, or?
I'd say we're leveling off because we were around 89% about a year ago, and then so we're kind of stable at that 90-ish percentage range. But hopefully we can get that back to what we've had at historical levels.
So something to watch and perhaps strategize around to bring people back into the district. Huh? Thank you.
Superintendent?
Thank you, President Segura. So you might be hearing that at the state level, there is a budget deficit, kind of ranges between $25 and $30 billion, which is significant. One of the things I think that we have is to be grateful for is during Governor Brown's governorship, he established a reserve that is specific to education. So while there may be a shortfall at the state level, at least there's an ability for the state to buffer some of that shortfall for a period of time. The Legislative Analyst Office is still looking at the overall impact. But again, that's one of the things that we can be grateful for, is there's an ability to have a little bit of a financial buffer from the state level. And really after Prop 13, school districts became much more of creatures or an extension of the state. So to the degree that the state can have that fiscal stability, I think it helps us weather any possible financial downturn. Again, we need to be mindful and continue to be good stewards of district resources. But there is that ability to be able to have a little bit of a buffer. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? If you could please, just for the education reminder, and I always forget the number, but in regards to like our the declining enrollment, say we lose 1,000 students, or let me say it the other way. Say we gain 1,000 students, how much money additionally is that per year?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, again, it varies by grade level or whatnot, but generally speaking, the district receives approximately $10,000 per student. And so if you think about that, $1,000 gain would be approximately $1 million that would be gained. Conversely, 1,000 students lost would be $1 million lost. So it's not quite exact, but that's a general kind of rule of thumb from a financial perspective.
Thank you. No other questions or comments around that? We can move on to the RFP for the audit firm, the request for proposal audit firms, C6.
Chair Segura and the committee. So this is an informational item. Typically when we go out to prepare an RFP, because we are in the 5th year with Crow, and so per ed code, we have a 5-year window with contracts, and just best practice too with service providers. We will be working closely with Don Prince and the purchasing team to develop an RFP. So over the course of the next few months, our goal is to bring forward probably by the November board meeting a recommendation through that RFP process. We will invite firms, we will go through the solicitation process, we'll go through an interview process, and then bring that forward going forward. So we're just advising or sharing with the committee that we are at that stage of having to go out for an RFP, to keep you apprised of that.
Thank you. Yes, and that was C5. I said C6. Any questions or comments around that? If not, we can move to C6, internal audit items.
Thank you, President Segura. For this item, I will ask Ms. Daphne Enriquez, our internal auditor, to go over the particular internal audit items that are open at this time.
Yes, hi, good evening. The first item is the internal audits ongoing and completed. This is a document that provides the status of the items that are on the internal audit 2-year work plan, which we are in the 2nd year of. The first area or category of this ongoing and completed are all the audits that we currently have on our work plan. The objective of these audits are to evaluate the adequacy of the internal controls that are in place for those areas. We currently have 6 in process, such as the engagements for the district's fraud hotline, the district's unduplicated count. Second page shows that we have an internal audit for miscellaneous collections. Those are revenues that are received at the school sites for miscellaneous income such as facility use, library collections, and transcript fees. We also have an internal audit for nutrition services. That is a routine audit of student eligibility. We also have ongoing audits for associated student bodies as well as our after-school ACES program. The third page is our second section for non-audit services. These are engagements that are advisory or consulting in nature, as well as engagements that are agreed upon with management, such as the ASB's financial statements, which we review on a monthly basis, as well as the review of the district's commercial warrants. Wanted to highlight Table B, that's on page 4. Most of our effort since the December meeting has been to provide one-on-one trainings with the ASBs, which we are doing on a weekly basis, and that's to provide an overview of ASB key processes. We'll be doing those through the remainder of the school year. So we have listed here those that have been completed as well as those that are pending that will continue through page 5. And then page 6 is the last section of the ongoing and completed, which is the appendix of the issued reports. The gray cells indicate the reports that were presented in a previous meeting. On the current agenda, we have 1 report to present, which is on the last page. It's page 10 of the ongoing and completed. I'm sorry, there's actually 2, the Fraud Hotline Quarterly Report and another for the audit of instructional minutes. If we refer to the report for instructional minutes, the results were that the sites that were examined were in compliance with state guidelines. To prevent a shortage of instructional minutes, a district actually requires more instructional time compared to the CDE's minimum requirements. There was one observation on this report, which is on page 3, where there was 1 site out of the 10 selected for testing that did not meet the district's requirements. However, they did meet the CDE's minimum requirements, which is considered acceptable. As part of this report, we also did a follow-up on prior audit findings, which begins on page 4. The result of that indicated that student support services implemented procedures in a manner that resolved the prior year audit issues or mitigated the identified risks. And following this report, we also have a corrective action plan that was provided by Student Support Services in response to the current year internal audit report. The department concurred with the observation that was made in the internal audit report and provided a corrective action plan, which they plan to fully implement by May 1st of this year, and that they believe will remedy the observation and prevent future occurrences. That's all we have for the ongoing and completing.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments around that? I know there was could you just dive in a little bit more on where I read where it was speaking about time passing and or passing time and how that wasn't, there was a, I guess, item or I don't know if it was a finding or review. Could you speak about that?
Sure, yes. On page 3, the observation notes that the school did not claim up to 50 minutes of qualified time that was eligible for credit. That would be passing time between 2 periods. So if we had passing time between periods 1 and 2, that would qualify as time that could be counted towards instructional minutes. And in this observation, this particular site did not include up to 50 minutes of that time. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, I found that interesting, and I see where we require more minutes, and so that if something does happen, we're covered and we'll meet the CDE's requirement of minutes. That's correct?
That's correct, and that's why that's like a buffer that's
Buffer,
built
right.
in case something were to happen on a particular day. We still are compliant with the state requirements.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
I'm sorry, did you skip over the fraud hotline update?
That's actually going to be the last item.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we can move on.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
The final item is the district's fraud hotline quarterly report. We issue this on a quarterly basis, so this one is for the quarter that ended December 31st. For some background, the Office of Internal Audit and the Compliance Department, through a third-party provider, administers a district's fraud hotline, which is designed to report suspected cases of fraud. For the quarter that ended in December 31st, there were 3 fraud hotline submissions. All of these were closed. One was non-fraud related to student residency and forwarded to the administrator of the school site. And the other 2 cases that were closed were not within the scope of the fraud hotline. For the current fiscal year, there has been 4 case submissions. There was also one that remained open from the prior year, and as of the quarter end, there were no active cases. Page 2 provides a brief summary of the cases or reports that were received during this year. So you see all 4 there with the status of closed. And there's also a case that was rolled forward from the prior year, which is listed a little bit below there, that shows that this has been closed as well.
Thank you. Any questions around that? Okay, I think that concludes that. Item 6, and we can move to 7, C7 review charter 2023-24.
This item is provided also as an informational item to highlight the change that went into effect last year regarding the 2 community members that are selected for a 2-year term for a 4-year maximum. So we just wanted to highlight that and have the charter there as a reference if there are any questions on it, given new committee members.
So any questions around that? Hope you stay. Please.
How do you do the math on mine? I was first under a 1-year term, now I'm under a 2-year term.
It counts towards.
I think we'll refer that to council and bring back additional information.
Good question, sir.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
No other questions, and we can move, yes. We can move to item 8, board policy.
This item too is also an informational item given new committee members, just because it does highlight the role of the Audit and Finance Subcommittee under the financial reports and accountability aspect of it. So again,
Thank you.
just as a reference.
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to, put into a little bit of context. I know in the past, and we've moved past that, there was issues with interfund transfers. And we kind of shifted away from that. And I'm seeing in the district audit, it was like 100,000. And then we see in Propo, it's about 100,000 also with salaries. But now with the grants, it's $1 million that we're seeing that are basically interfund transfers. So my question I end up having is, do interfund transfers require board notification and or approval? And just, I'm looking at the volume of money that's going between deferred maintenance and adult ed and, the bond funds and grants. How's that? I just want to make sure it's reconciled and it's disclosed. So.
Superintendent?
Thank you. No, that's a great question, definitely. So I'll ask our CFO, Dr. Sokol, to respond to that question.
There's 2 questions I just wanted to clarify because there are 2 types of interfund transfers. So from a borrowing standpoint, we have limited that from other funds because we've got a good financial cash position at this time, but we do take that annually as a resolution to the board in June. That allows us to borrow up to 75% in accordance with Ed Code, and then there's certain timetables as to when those monies need to be reimbursed back. So if that was a borrowing different funds. As it relates to interfund transfer, sometimes there are expenditures that are incurred in one fund that need to go. So we've had, as an example, and it was part of the bonds, in Fund 35, our State School Facilities Fund, there was some early design work that was done before the bond was issued so that we could start the DSA work and things like that. Those expenditures, there's a reimbursement agreement that was set up under the bonds when it went to the board in September that memorializes that transfer, and then we go through a reconciliation process of saying, let's say it's $100,000, those monies got moved from Fund 35 over to the bond. So we go through an accounting process, but that's the supporting documentation that allows us to do that.
Gotcha. Is the board notified of those on like a monthly basis?
It's
Okay.
through the board action, and
board
then
action.
also through the financial statements.
Perfect, thank you.
And we do have monthly financial statements that we bring forward to the board and a Friday update.
Yeah, it's definitely disclosed to the board and the public. It's very important. I did want to say, after the 2018 financial meltdown, we stopped the interfund borrowing, which is different than a transfer. Transfer is a movement. Borrowing is you actually borrow and you must pay back with interest. Given that at this point we've recovered, we're still not, given our cash position, we don't anticipate any interfund borrowing in the next fiscal year. Moving forward, just want to put that out there that it might be worthy of consideration given that interest rates have increased significantly. When we borrow from financial institutions, we pay interest to financial institutions. When we borrow from other internal funds, we pay interest to other internal funds. So what happens is, in essence, our internal funds are able to receive that accrued interest. So it's worthy of, I think, consideration moving forward. If anything, rather than paying the interest to a financial institution, paying the program so that there might be an additional funds, i.e. the interest, only in the case that cash considerations would come into play. So again, it's not anticipated during the next fiscal year. It's not anything we're going to be doing over the next 18 months. But as we transition to a different period in time in the future, it might be worthy of consideration for the board to consider. Again, it was due to kind of some of the situations that we had, both with cash positions and some of the different funds. If the direction is to continue borrowing from financial institutions, that can definitely happen. I'm mindful that the interest rate in that case accrues to the financial institution rather than the possibility of accruing internally. It's a consideration, not in the short term. That's a longer term issue. But now that we're talking about it, that reminded me. So I just wanted to put it out there.
And just a question for you, and any of those decisions would come before the board to make sure that it's done in public and for the record?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Good question, thank you. Any other questions around that? If not, we can move to the calendar meeting minutes, or calendar of meetings.
Yes, because we're looking ahead now to document those dates. So we're proposing in July and October and December and then March. So we've got a year's worth that has key milestones from what Crow shared today. Well, they'll provide updates on the progress work that they're doing. And then we'll also provide updates regarding interims or also budget work that's done as well. So you can see kind of what our typical agenda items would be during that time frame, what we would bring forward in accordance with various ed codes or government codes. And then that December 4th meeting specifically, to echo what was shared with Crow, that's when they would bring the draft audit to this committee to review. So that the following meeting would be when we present it to the board.
Question?
Trustee Emerald.
And these meeting dates would also comport with other issues that could impact our budgeting ability, state budgets, special funds, legislation that we're anticipating that could impact our budget?
It depends on the timing. I mean, these are typically report out. It would be in some cases after the fact, but the audit report itself would be in progress. So yes, I think what they highlighted is accordance with the state audit guide and the parameters that they're working with.
Okay, so that's, so these dates are strategic in that respect?
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of, yes, providing updates to the committee and then with statutory requirements.
Can we move on to item 11, review of the minutes from the December 5th meeting? And we'll need a
Motion to approve.
Let's move the second, and then we'll vote. Trustee Emerald? Yes, I'm a yes. Committee member? Yes. Committee
Yes.
members? Yes, yes. Thank you. And then we can do the recap. And I think you could add on other committee members. So for sure, Trustee Emerald wants her hard copy, and she's going to get that. And I think, and then we had a question from committee member Schmidt about the asking what sites have already been audited. So I think that was the only two. Is there any other things? Anything else I missed?
Just what term I'm on.
And what term? Thank you, sir. And so with that, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, do you
Committee
want a
Member
paper
Smith.
copy as well?
Okay, no problem. Yeah, that's your, yeah. You know what? And I should have checked, when it came out on Friday, I should have checked with everybody because it's like our first meeting as a committee to make sure everybody had, you know, I've been around like a old rock, so I'm kind of used to it. So I should have checked with everybody. So we definitely have learned and we'll move forward in that direction. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.